Open your Bibles to 1 Corinthians chapter 3. 1 Corinthians chapter 3. We are moving forward in our study of 1 Corinthians. We pick up in verse 16 this morning. We've been talking about Paul wrote the letter to the church of Corinth. They were having some problems with divisions. He's been discussing some of those issues, talking to them about why they shouldn't be doing that, talking about the fact that he and Apollos were just ministers and that Christ was who they were supposed to be following, and that they were being carnal and immature instead of being full-grown Christians. Verse 16, do you not know that you are God's temple and God's Spirit dwells in you? If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy him, for God's temple is holy, and you are that temple. And that seems to be the case. Verse 16 and 17 talks about we are the God's temple. That is a reference to the church. In chapter 6, later on chapter 6, is going to talk about Christians themselves being God's temple. In this context, it's talking about the church as a whole, not individual members. Well, in the context, he's talking about their divisions and their schisms in the body. He's talking about harming the body that way, damaging the body. If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy him. That's a reference to those divisions and schisms causing damage in the body of Christ. You are that temple. Verse 18, let no one deceive himself. If anyone among you thinks that he is wise in this age, let him become a fool, that he may become wise. And that sounds like it doesn't make sense, but in reality it does. We remember back earlier in the book, he talked about the wisdom of the world and the wisdom of God. The wisdom of the world looks at things one way. The wisdom of God looks at things another way. So if you think you're wise in this age, that is in the world, you're looking at it from the world's perspective. If you're wise from the world's perspective, you need to become a fool from the world's perspective so you will be wise from God's perspective. Christians need to or should look at things from a completely different perspective. Because the goal of the world is to get money. The goal of the world is to get power. The goal of the world is to get prestige. The goal of the world is to become famous, to become a great person. The goal of a Christian is to get to heaven. And those are two completely different things. If you go by the world's goals, if you try to get rich, if you try to get powerful, if you try to get prestige, all likely you're not going to get to heaven. Because that's not your goal. And so he says, if you're wise in this world, become a fool in this world so that you can be wise according to God. For the wisdom of this world is folly with God. For it is written, he catches the wise in their craftiness. Again, the Lord knows the thoughts of the wise, that they are futile. God's wisdom compared to man's wisdom, there's not really a comparison to be made. God understands. In fact, God created us. So God knows we are spiritual beings. We need to have a spiritual purpose in life. We need to be living with a goal of being right with him, because that's how we fulfill our greatest potential. Ecclesiastes chapter 12, the last couple of verses of the chapter, Solomon says, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. This is why man was created. Man was created to serve and to worship God. When we don't do that, we miss out on our purpose for life, on our real purpose for being here. I've talked before about the fact that I believe God created us with a God-sized hole in our heart. And there's nothing that will fill that but God. We've tried to fill it with everything else. And so he says, our wisdom, world's wisdom, doesn't match up to God's. And God's wisdom will catch man every time. He catches the wise in their craftiness. And again, the Lord knows the thoughts of the wise, that they are futile. If you think about a battle of intellectualism, a battle of knowledge, man thinks he's going to get into a battle with God about wisdom and intellectual. Who's going to win? not even a contest. Man's ways are futile when it comes to God. We really, from our own perspective, from our own knowledge, we don't really know anything. What we know comes through our knowledge of God. That's what we have to keep in mind. Let no one boast in men, for all things are yours, whether Paul or Apollos or Cephas or the world or life or death or the present and the future, all are yours, and you are Christ, and Christ is God. Don't boast in man, because your things are not coming from man. Men are not going to give you anything. Because if you're in God, if you're with God, then everything belongs to you. It's all yours. Whether of Paul or Apollos or Cephas or the world or life or death or the present or the future, all are yours. We have the best that God has to offer. I've oftentimes heard people say, the Christian denies the best of this world to get the best of that world. That's a lie. You think God created us to live in a world where you have to give up the best of the world to please Him? No. God wants to have the best of this life. And the fact of the matter is, we get the best of this life from serving and obeying God. The devil has told us a lie. He has told us the best of this world is in wickedness, is in serving, and it's not. I remember a young girl was asked one time, she was a young adult, and she was asked one time, you don't drink, you don't have sex, what do you do for fun? She said, what I do for fun is I wake up every morning without having to hug the toilet. I wake up every morning not having to worry about who I slept with last night. I wake up every morning not having to worry about whether I've got a venereal disease or not. Christians have the best of this world and the best of the next world. You know, we do give up what Satan says is the best of this world. That's not really the best of this world. It's a lie from Satan. All are yours, and you are Christ's, and Christ is God's. We belong, everything is ours. We belong to Christ. Christ belongs to God. The reason everything is ours is because we belong to Christ.
Do you think he was writing about wisdom and foolishness because to the core of the church because of where Corinth was located?
Has a lot to do with it. The fact that they were such a paganistic headquarters, and the city of Corinth, their idea of wisdom was totally opposite to what real wisdom was. You have to remember, Corinth, the church was established in Jerusalem. Jerusalem was primarily a Jewish city. They already had a knowledge of God. Most of them already had a faith in God. Corinth was not a Jewish city. Corinth was a pagan city. Corinth was a Gentile city. And most of the Corinthians, although there were some Jews there, most of the Corinthians were pagans. And many of the Jews who lived there had kind of compromised some of their beliefs to fit in a Gentile world. They didn't want to stand out. And so the idea that you give up things in order to be with God, and the idea that, go for the gusto, live for pleasure, get the best that you can because tomorrow you're dead. That was the paganistic philosophy. And that's totally opposite to what Christianity is.
Is that what you call in Greek culture Stoicism?
I'd have to go back and research that again. There's Stoicism and there's Epicureanism. Stoicism, I think, is the idea that you, because the world is evil, you withhold yourself from everything. Epicureanism is the idea that just have all the fun you can. What the world considers fun. Those were two basic philosophies in the Gentile world, and eventually it began to affect the church. By the time many of Paul's epistles were written, especially later in the first century, Gnosticism had become prevalent in much of the church, and it was kind of based on of those two ideas, so that they're kind of both there. Question or comment? Chapter 4. This is how one should regard us, as servants of Christ and stewards of the mystery of God. Moreover, it is required of stewards that he be found faithful. The first question is, what's a steward? What? Okay, it is a servant, but it's a special kind of servant.
Someone who is entrusted with something.
Somebody who's been trusted with somebody else's possessions. Give you an idea. Here's an illustration. Pharaoh. Remember, he appointed Joseph. Joseph had charge of everything that Pharaoh owned. He bought, he sold, he invested, he did everything on behalf of Pharaoh. He was Pharaoh's steward. That wasn't his stuff. He didn't own any of it. It all belonged to Pharaoh. He just took charge of it. So that's a steward. He's in charge of somebody else's possession. Paul says we are servants of Christ and stewards of the mystery of God. We now serve God. That's our purpose for being here. We are servants. If I'm not mistaken, that word translated servant there is the word from the Greek which literally means slave, or doulos. Not only are we servants, he said, we are stewards of the mysteries of God. What are the mysteries of God? The gospel. Redemption, salvation, forgiveness, all of those. And Paul says we have been given those. Paul and some of the other apostles, some of the other people in the first century were inspired. They had gotten those messages directly from God, and they were sharing it with the world, and so they were put in charge of the gospel now. If he's in charge of it, if he's a steward of it, does he get to change it? Does he get to rewrite it? Does he get to teach it the way he wants to teach it? No, because it's not his. It's God's. And so he shares those mysteries with you and with I. He says, moreover, it is required of stewards that they be found what? Faithful. They're taking care of their master's possessions. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're providing for them, and they're providing for the well-being of the master by taking care of those possessions. And so the possessions that Paul is talking about is not physical possessions. He's talking about the gospel. Being able to share the gospel with the world. We have the responsibility, because God entrusted us with that, and we have the responsibility to share it with other people. Later on in some of his writings, Paul said the gospel has been placed in earthen vessels. If you and I don't share the gospel with the world, let me ask you a simple question. Who will?
The old song says, God has no hands but our hands. He has no
feet
voice but ours. And it's true. It's true, you know.
There is no plan B. We're it. We're it. And if Christians don't share the gospel, it's not going to get shared, because the devil's certainly not going to do it. And so that's the point that he said it's required of stewards they be found faithful. They do what God asks them to do. With me, it is a very small thing. I should be judged by you or by any human court. In fact, I do not even judge myself. I am not aware of anything against myself, but I am not thereby acquitted. It is the Lord who judges me. In those couple of verses, Paul talked about 3 tribunals of court. He talked about public opinion, he talked about conscience, and he talks about God. And in essence, he says the only one that matters is God. He said, I find it a very small thing that I'm judged by you. We've talked before about the fact there were some people in Corinth who were degrading the Apostle Paul, who were downgrading his apostleship, who were downgrading his message in an attempt to teach something else. And the only reason Paul is not being egotistical and talking about himself. He's talking about the fact if they downgrade his apostleship, they downgraded his message. In order to protect the message, he has to protect his apostleship. And so that's what this is all about. But he says, I don't consider it a big thing to be judged by you. In fact, I don't even judge myself.
You know, that's our problem. We worry about what other people think. I mean, we tell our kids, you know, if they're being bullied a little bit, you know, sticks and stones may hurt my bones, but, you know, words will never hurt me. Number one, we're lying.
Yeah.
Because words can.
Words do hurt. Words hurt bad.
Then we want to keep up with the Joneses, which I don't have to because I am partially Jones. And then we give up things spiritual.
Yeah. Paul talks about the fact, he said, I'm not worried about being judged by you. I'm not even worried about being judged by myself, my own conscience. Notice he says, I do not judge myself. I'm not aware of anything against myself. I'm not aware that I've done anything wrong. But that does not mean I am acquitted. That does not mean I'm not guilty. Because I'm not the judge. It is the Lord who judges me. And so it's the idea that as a steward, I'm a steward of God's possessions. Who am I accountable to for my stewardship? God. Joseph was accountable to Pharaoh. Joseph was not accountable to everybody else around him. Joseph was not accountable to the farmers and the businessmen and all those people he worked with. He was accountable to Pharaoh. I am accountable to God. Paul said, I am judged by God. That's who makes the final decision. Now, you need to understand there is some point at which reputation plays a part. The Bible talks about making sure you have a good reputation. Living the way that you ought to live. Living the way that you should live. But the ultimate judge is not my reputation out here. The ultimate judge is my reputation that way. And that's the point that Paul made. I'm judged by God. I am either acquitted or I am condemned by God, not by man. Therefore do not pronounce judgment before the time, before the Lord comes, who will bring to light the things now hidden in darkness and will disclose the purposes of the heart. Then each one will receive his commendation from God. Do not pronounce judgment before the time, before the Lord comes. Evidently, he's talking about the second coming. When Christ comes back and final judgment will be made. Why should I not declare judgment before then? I think there are a couple of reasons at least. Number one, that's not my job. I'm not the judge. God is. Number two, if I make a judgment now, what happens if things change in 20 years? There's an example of that in the Old Testament that I missed for a long time. If you only read the book 1 Kings, and you read the story of King Manasseh, the Bible talks about the fact he made the streets of Jerusalem to flow with innocent blood. He was the most wicked king Judah ever had. Now, if you read Kings and you leave it off there, you get the idea that Manasseh was just a horrible, terrible, no good person. If you read the parallel passage in Chronicles, in 2 Chronicles, you will find there is a point in Manasseh's life when he was carried captive to Babylon. And while in Babylon, he repented. God brought him back as king in Judah, and he became a righteous king. And if you had judged him before that repentance, he would have been eternally lost. But after that, he repented. You can't judge somebody too early because you never know. As long as they're breathing, there's a chance they can come back to God, as long as they're still alive. And I've read several stories in the last 2 weeks on the internet about people that were baptized in their 90s. Your chance to get right with God doesn't end until you quit breathing. You might can make a determination based on your own. I'm sure if some of the prophets or some of the righteous people in Judah had looked at Manasseh, well, that's a horrible person. He's never going to be right with God. He's lost. But he wasn't. Because he changed. He repented. And it's also true that people can be righteous for a long time and then turn and become wicked. Either one of those is the case. So you can't make a judgment before it's time. When the Lord comes, who will bring to light things that are hidden in darkness and disclose the purposes of the heart. We as human beings are oftentimes very good at hiding things from other human beings. Our heart can be as dark as can be. And you look at the life, and the life seems to be the total of the opposite. In many ways, some examples of that would be the Pharisees in the first century, because they're putting all this public show. All these broad phylacteries and giving bunches of money and praying and singing and praises God in the public, putting on this religious show. But Jesus talks about the fact their heart was full of uncleanness and wickedness. So you can't always judge from the outside, but what Jesus says is those things you hid, those things you buried somewhere, those things you didn't let anybody else see, they're coming to light. God is going to bring to light the darkness and the wickedness.
You can have good things in your heart. I mean, I saw a Catholic priest at a bus stop one time doing his, and I said, he's just being like the Pharisees. But then I thought, I don't know his heart.
You don't know that.
And I mean, you know, some people, I knew a man that when he prayed, he went very flowery. And you and I were talking about one of the Jordanaires leading singing. Maybe that was in his heart to do that. Pray walk.
You have, let me just say it this way. We have no business judging anybody's heart. I can make a determination about the actions that they are taking, whether they are right or whether they are wrong. I can say nothing about their motive unless they tell me, because I can't read their motive. I don't know why they're doing that. They may be doing it for good reasons. They may not be doing it for good reasons. I don't know that. And trying to determine the status of somebody's heart is almost impossible for a human being because we can't read it. The only thing I know about your heart is what you show me or what you tell me. I can't get beyond the surface. But he says these things that were hidden will be disclosed. Now, it is my contention, and I may be dead wrong here, and you may think I am, but I'm going to say it anyway. It is my contention that those things that you have done wrong that God has forgiven will not be brought back up. When he talks about bringing to light the things of darkness and hidden things, he's talking about sins, I think, sins that have not been forgiven yet. Because Scripture teaches when God forgives, and that's it. He doesn't bring it up again. He doesn't use it anymore. And so it is my belief when he talks about hidden things being brought to light, he's talking about those things that we have hidden and have not repented of. have not gotten forgiveness of. I don't think it would be the thing that God would do to forgive you for something, and then 40 years later, when you show up in Judgment Day, He's going to bring that up again. I don't think that's right. We talk all the time about the fact that if you forgive somebody, you have an argument with them 10 years later, you can't bring up what you just forgave them on. I think the same principle works with God. He forgives you, He forgives you. That's it. It's done. It's over. Now the consequences, the lessons may remain, but the guilt of the sin is gone. Because God forgave you. And then the last part of that verse is, each will receive his commendation from God. My judgment is coming from God. God will determine whether or not I am His child or not. God will determine whether I am going to heaven or not. It will be determined not based on a whim, but based on the kind of person that I have been. It is, the Bible talks about the fact judgment has been committed to Christ, but who committed it to Christ? God did. So whether you're talking about judgment coming from God or judgment coming from Christ, you're talking about the same judgment. Question or comment, anything we've talked about up to this point? Verse 6, I have applied all these things to myself and to Apollos for your benefit, brothers, that we learn not to go beyond what is written, that none of you may be puffed up in favor of one against another. Now, Paul says in this verse, I'm using Apollos and I as an example. You are forming sects based on Paul and Apollos. And you shouldn't be doing that. Now, nowhere in this book does Paul say, I approve of this. Nowhere in the book does Paul say the sect that's following Paul is the right one. In fact, he condemns all division. We all ought to be following Christ. He said, I have applied all these things to myself and Apollos, this thing about being ministers, about being servants, about being stewards, about being working for God, so that you can learn not to go beyond what is written, that none of you may be puffed up in favor of one against another. And that's exactly what they were doing. You go back to chapter 1, and Paul talks about the fact that some were saying they were of Cephas, some were saying they were of Apollos, some were saying they were of Paul, some were saying they were of Christ, and they were pitting each other against one another. They were puffing themselves up. Paul is better than Apollos. He says, I'm a follower of Paul and not Apollos. That means I'm better than Apollos. No, Apollos is better than Paul. So if I follow Apollos, that means I'm better than you. No, Peter's better than any of them. So I'm following Peter. That means I'm better than all of you. That's the problem they were having. They were putting human beings, even though they were great human beings, even though they were apostles, even though they were servants of God, they were putting human beings on a pedestal. I am following Paul. I am following Peter. I am following Apollos. No. You should be following Christ. And that's true. Paul later says, imitate me as I imitate Christ. But I've talked about it on many occasions. If Christ is going this way and Paul is going this way and I'm following Paul, who am I following? I'm following Christ. Because that's who Paul's following. Now, if Paul steps out of line and starts going the wrong way, my responsibility is to keep following Christ. He's talking about the fact that as Christians, we are simply servants of God. Now, I will admit, many of you have heard me talk about this, there are certain preachers, there are certain Christians who I greatly admire. You've heard me talk a lot over the last several weeks about a young man by the name of Dan Winkler, who I think is an amazing gospel preacher. When I went to polishing the pulpit last week, he spoke about 7 or 8 times, and I went to every one of them I could because I love to listen to him. But you have to remember, Dan Winkler, pardon my English, Dan Winkler ain't God. Dan Winkler is Dan Winkler. great preacher, I think. He's a servant of God. That's all he is. He's not deity. He's not perfect. He's not better than me or you. He just happens to do this thing better than other people do it, in my opinion. Some of you may totally disagree with that. But I can't be a follower of Dan Winkler. I can't be a follower of Guy Woods. I can't be a follower of George Benson, or any of that we consider to be good, great preachers. When I was a kid, my favorite preacher was a man by the name of Franklin Camp. Most of you have probably never heard of him. Used to love to listen to Franklin Camp. But he's not God. We can admire people. We can admire Christians, but we can't cross the line into worship and into the idea that this person is God and whatever he says is the gospel truth. That may not be right. Because the human beings can be wrong. I promise you, I've said some things over my years of preaching that were not right. I didn't intend to. I preached an entire sermon one time on Abraham building the ark. You didn't know he did that, did you? Fact of the matter is he didn't. I got my names mixed up. But the funny thing is, I was preaching to about 50 or 60 people, and one person noticed it. And whether the other people noticed it and just didn't say anything, I don't know. But one person said something.
Sad thing is, a lot of these people have been led astray. People like Rudolph Shelley, others through time have, not just him,
Yeah.
he's done his bunch of damage. And that woman that killed one of the Winklers, she did her damage.
Yeah.
Because I can remember how, y'all were sort of removed,
I wasn't.
but you know what I'm saying.
My daughter was in Freed Hardeman when that happened, and it happened about 45 miles from Freed Hardeman, so I know all about it.
But you know what I'm saying.
For those of you who don't know, Dan Winkler's son, Mark, was preaching for a small church outside of Henderson, Tennessee, in the middle 80s or early 90s, when his wife shot him in the back in bed and killed him. Yeah. And then she went, I saw her on Phil Donahue. She went on television shows all over the country talking about what a horrible person Mark Winkler was. How terrible he had been to her. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. I doubt it, but I can't prove it one way or the other. Does that mean you shoot somebody in the back while they're asleep? Does that mean you run all over the country and ruin their reputation? And the sad thing about it was she was allowed to say whatever she wanted to say. She went on all these talk shows and all these interviews. His family was not allowed to say a word. Not a word.
It bothered me about children, about their children,
Yeah.
the legacy. One of the deacons at Broadmoor murdered a woman in Nashville, and it destroyed his family.
Yeah.
And one lady that I knew, I talk about the lady at Broadmoor had Dixon Springs, but the church wouldn't even be there. It was his aunt. It hurt her so deep, and it was PTSD, post-traumatic stress, and
Yeah.
and he's done good work in the Tennessee State Prison. He is
Well,
no telling how many people.
if you commit, if you do something wrong, it doesn't condemn you the rest of your life. But you have to owe up and accept accountability. I see everybody walk in, the bell's rung, so I'm done. We will pick up with, let me see where I got to. Verse 7. Next Sunday morning.
Bill Braxton's, Bill Braxton's wife.
Mhm.
And Braxton still has a lot of work to do.
Well, unfortunately, this lady got 6 years and got off in 2. And the last I heard, she has her kids back. What? Yeah. The thing that bugged us too out of me, she got her kids back. Our government.